Unexpected event at the hospital. The hospital is always a bustling place with the calls of patients, the hurried footsteps of doctors and nurses, and the whirring sounds of machines. But today, amidst the noise, an unexpected event made the atmosphere tense and full of anxiety. Mrs. Smith, a mother with panicked eyes, rushed into the hospital, shouting to the crowd, "My son, Noah is missing. Where did he go?" Her eyes were red, her hair was messy, as if a nightmare was tearing her heart apart. Dr. Reynolds, who seemed to be used to emergency situations, quickly approached Mrs. Smith, trying to reassure her, but could not hide the anxiety in his eyes. "Calm down, we will help you find the boy," he said, but in his heart he felt the urgency, the clear threat. Precious time was passing by every second. Everyone around was trying to help, but no one had any clue about Noah's whereabouts. Mrs. Smith could only stand there, extremely worried, and kept praying for her son. At that moment, a strange event occurred, like a sign from somewhere. A German Shepherd dog suddenly appeared from behind the hospital, rushing into the hospital grounds. The dog was not afraid, not stopped, but kept moving towards the center of the hospital. The security guards saw a strange dog entering the area. They immediately approached to chase it out. But the dog did not leave, but stopped, turned its head to look at them, then continued to move towards Dr. Reynolds, barking loudly as if to convey something. "It doesn't look like a stray dog," Dr. Reynolds thought. "There's something strange about this dog." With a doubtful but also determined look, Dr. Reynolds decided not to chase the dog away, but followed. They followed the dog, not knowing that it was leading them to a great mystery, a journey that none of them could have expected. As the medical team and Mrs. Smith stood there, watching, their eyes sparkled with hope. This dog knows something. No one knew that this dog, Charlie, would become a hero in the search for Noah. And their journey had just begun, opening a story full of excitement, wonder, and dangers that they could not have foreseen. The search. Charlie leads the way. Dr. Reynolds didn't hesitate. He glanced at the nurses and Mrs. Smith, signaling them to follow the dog. The German Shepherd was no stranger to these paths, as he quickly led them out of the hospital grounds, straight to the main entrance. But not the main entrance where people usually entered and exited, but a small secluded exit that few people noticed. Charlie ran quickly, his nose scanning the air, breathing deeply, then turning back to look at the group, as if to confirm whether they were following. Every time Charlie turned back, Mrs. Smith felt hope flare up in her heart. Suddenly, she began to feel as if this dog could bring an answer to her nightmare. "Does he know where my son is?" she whispered, her steps no longer seeming as heavy as before. The group didn't say a word, but Dr. Reynolds and the nurse's eyes were always filled with concern and trust in the dog. They followed Charlie through the narrow passages between the buildings and onto a path that led to the back of the hospital. From the outside, it was just an abandoned lot with a few old buildings, but Charlie didn't hesitate, moving forward with an unusual confidence, as if he knew every corner of the area. Then, as they approached an old sewer tunnel, strange noises began to echo through the silence, a faint cry, the sound unclear but enough to make everyone present shiver. Mrs. Smith started, her heart clenched as she realized it was her son's voice. "Noah!" she screamed, and in desperation she rushed forward. Charlie stood still, his ears pricked, his eyes focused on the old tunnel. It didn't bark or move anymore, but its appearance told everyone that they were close, just one step away. Dr. Reynolds, without hesitation, rushed towards the pit, bent down to look inside. What caught his eye was the image of a child, who could only be Noah, lying motionless, his legs trapped between large rocks. Mrs. Smith collapsed beside him, her hands shaking but full of determination. My child, my child." She choked, her eyes filled with tears. Dr. Reynolds immediately signaled for the nurses and rescue workers to come and help. "Get him out quickly," he ordered hurriedly. Everything happened in a rush and tension. The nurses tried to pull the rock out, while another nurse comforted Noah, saying that everything would be okay. Noah opened his eyes weakly, but his face was still pale and full of fear. The boy couldn't speak, only stammering a few words, then gasping for breath. From outside the tunnel, Mrs. Smith begged her son not to give up. But at that moment, while the group was trying to find a way to rescue him, Charlie took action again. He did not stand still, but bent down, rushed into the tunnel, and continued to sniff around other areas. This scene left everyone stunned, wondering how a dog could be so smart. But after a few seconds of astonishment, Dr. Reynolds decided not to hesitate any longer. Little Noah was finally freed, and although he was very weak, at least he was no longer trapped. When they brought Noah to the surface, Mrs. Smith hugged her son tightly, tears streaming down her face. Thank you, Charlie, she choked, not knowing what else to say. Everyone around could not hide their admiration and respect for the dog. Charlie stood there, eyes bright, head held high, as if he knew he had done something great. But the story did not end there. As everyone returned to the hospital, bustling with joy at Noah's rescue, Charlie continued to lead them. No one understood why the dog continued to refuse to stop, but they all realized that something was waiting for them ahead. An even greater mystery was about to be revealed. Charlie, the silent hero, might be leading them to something even more dangerous than what they had faced. And the search was not over. Charlie had more to show them. More victims found as the rescue team and Mrs. Smith brought Noah to the hospital. The atmosphere was filled with joy and relief. Everyone could not help but breathe a sigh of relief when Noah was saved and Mrs. Smith held her son in her arms. The anxiety finally disappeared. But Charlie the dog did not stop. Even though everything seemed to be resolved, the animal did not leave. It turned to look at Dr. Reynolds, its sharp eyes as if to remind them that their work was not yet done. Dr. Reynolds looked down at Charlie, noticing the restlessness in the dog's eyes. It did not stop at saving a child. The dog continued to observe the surroundings, its eyes not leaving a nearby area. A strange feeling rose in the doctor's heart. He knew that there was something more behind what they had just experienced. With a decision that did not hesitate, Dr. Reynolds spoke up. We must continue. I think there may be more victims. Charlie led the way, not looking back, as if he already knew his next target. He headed towards the abandoned construction site, a deserted area outside the hospital that few people would pay attention to. It didn't seem like a place anyone would look for, but to Charlie, it was an obvious destination, as if the traces of the crime were imprinted on his nose. The group continued to follow Charlie, suspicious but unable to stop moving. Mrs. Smith, still worried about her son, followed again, hoping for another rescue from this brave dog. Only this time, the feeling of excitement and tension was greater. Charlie didn't stop until he was near the construction site. The area was once bustling, but now it was abandoned, with only unfinished buildings, piles of construction materials, and dust covering it. It was so quiet that you could hear the wind blowing through the cracks of the dilapidated structures. But in the silence, a faint sound was heard from somewhere in the darkness. At first, everyone thought it was just the wind. But no, when they listened closely, another sound was heard, cry weak and urgent, as if a child was calling for help. Mrs. Smith, feeling her heart stop, was startled and asked urgently, "Is that my child?" But Dr. Reynolds, in his excitement and tension, could not answer immediately. He signaled the group to be quiet and listen carefully. Charlie, without hesitation, rushed towards the sound. The dog led the rescue team into a hidden corner of the construction site, where piles of materials were piled up haphazardly. Heavy concrete blocks, scrap iron, and broken bricks had fallen down, forming a wall blocking the way. But Charlie was not confused. He immediately began to sniff and walk along the pile of materials. Not long after, its gaze stopped at a specific location, making everyone realize that something was hiding there. The rescue team quickly began to clean up, turning over each brick, each iron bar to find the child. And then, in a dark corner, they discovered the boy, lying unconscious, almost lifeless. The boy's face was pale, covered in cold sweat, his eyes closed. A nurse rushed over, checking the boy's condition. "He's exhausted, but he's still breathing," the nurse said while trying to check his heartbeat. As the boy gradually regained consciousness, in a daze, the boy began to stammer out his story. "There was a man. He caught me, told me not to call for help." The boy's voice was weak, but enough for everyone to realize that this was one of the kidnapping victims. Dr. Reynolds felt his anxiety rising. This child was not the first victim. As the rescue team tried to continue the rescue, Charlie did not stop. He turned around, barked loudly, and rushed towards another pile of construction materials. Everyone did not understand what was happening, but when they ran after him, they discovered a large wooden crate hidden in the pile of materials. Inside the crate was a girl about 6 years old, panicking and screaming. She hugged herself tightly, seemingly not daring to believe in salvation. "The bad man will come back. He told me not to go. He will kill me." The girl trembled, only able to utter panicked words. Mrs. Smith, tears streaming down her face, walked over to the girl, hugged her, and gently comforted her. "We won't let him come back. We will protect you." As the rescue team continued to rescue the victims, a heavy feeling gradually filled the air. From the moment Charlie led them to this construction site, everything was no longer a coincidence. "We are dealing with a criminal organization that is more dangerous than they could have imagined." Charlie stood there, eyes fixed, as if he knew there was more to this than meets the eye. The group knew their journey was not over yet. The mysteries behind these kidnappings were slowly being revealed, and there was worse to come. Initial investigation, expanding the case after the rescue team brought the victims to the hospital. The atmosphere here became heavier than ever. The medical staff rushed to take care of the children, while Dr. Reynolds and the police team continued to work to find the truth behind the strange disappearances. In particular, the eyes of Mrs. Smith, the mother who had experienced the pain of losing her child, were now filled with anxiety. The little girl who had just been rescued from the wooden box was still trembling, seemingly unable to calm down her fear. Charlie, although having completed the rescue mission, still refused to leave the hospital. He stood in the corner of the room, his bright eyes staring intently at the police team discussing. This dog seemed to realize that everything was not over yet. He knew that there was a big conspiracy waiting, and the dog did not want to miss the opportunity to stop until all the mysteries were exposed. A group of police officers, led by Lieutenant Miller, continued to examine the evidence and what Charlie had led them to in the abandoned construction site. They all felt that these abductions were not just random cases, but part of a larger criminal scheme. They decided to examine the security cameras around the construction site for more clues. As the police officers sat around the computer screens, scrolling through the video footage, an unexpected image appeared. In the videos from the security cameras near the construction site, a man in a gray jacket, walking slowly and somewhat strangely, appeared at key moments, the times when the children went missing. His image was blurry, but it was clear that he was not an ordinary passerby. He appeared suddenly, walking around the places where the children were abducted, as if he were part of the process. "We need to find this man," Lieutenant Miller said, his voice low and tense. "The sooner the better." Dr. Reynolds, who had been standing silently behind the group of police, suddenly had a thought. He turned around with a vague suspicion, as if remembering something. "Have you ever heard of the missing children that have occurred in this area? I have a strange feeling, as if everything is connected." At that moment, a young policeman, Officer Bennett, entered the room, holding a stack of documents. "Lieutenant, I have discovered some relevant information. These disappearances are not isolated cases. The records show that over the past 10 years, there have been at least 7 missing children in this area, all with similarities." The police and Dr. Reynolds looked at each other, feeling as if they were lifting the veil of a secret larger than they had ever imagined. As they dug deeper into the files, they found that there were photos from years ago, blurry but with one thing in common: a man in a gray coat standing near the locations where the children had gone missing. This was the image they had just seen on the security cameras. "We need to find out who he is," Dr. Reynolds said, his voice firm. "But we have to be careful. It looks like we're dealing with a much larger organization." At this point, Charlie, who had been standing still in the corner, suddenly stood up and began pacing around the room as if sensing something. He stopped, his eyes lighting up as he looked at the photo the police had just found. Charlie barked again, softly but firmly. It seemed to remind everyone that this was only the beginning of the investigation. He was still out there somewhere, and this dog was leading them to a truth they couldn't yet fathom. Dr. Reynolds walked over to Charlie, patting him on the head. "We're not stopping." "Thank you, Charlie. You're helping us." Suddenly, a phone call from the police department cut through the silence. Lieutenant Miller answered, his face tense. "Found something?" he asked, his voice laced with concern. After a moment, he put the receiver down and looked at the others in the room. "They found more traces of the suspect in the woods nearby. We'll have to leave now." Charlie's got the right lead. By now, everyone knew that what they were dealing with was more than just a single kidnapping. This was a criminal organization with a mysterious leader who had been operating for a decade. The clues led them to an abandoned house deep in the woods, which only made the police and rescue team more determined. The investigation is no longer a simple search. It is a war with a hidden enemy, a war they must win to protect innocent children. Charlie takes the lead again, this time not with the tenacity of a hero, but with a deep sense that it is leading them closer to the brutal truth about an organization they never imagined. Everything has changed now. Searching for clues, the abandoned house is deep in the woods, far from the attention of people. There is only one trail leading to this place. Almost no one dares to set foot here because of the mysterious stories about abandoned houses in the woods. But for Charlie, the intelligent German Shepherd, this is where he has sensed something, an important clue that the rescue team and the police cannot ignore. Charlie, with his courage and sensitivity, leads the group. Each step of the dog is a reminder that there can be no more hesitation. Dr. Reynolds and the team members follow, their eyes shining with determination, but also with anxiety. Behind the door of this abandoned house, there may be the key to solving everything, or a greater danger awaits them. As they approach the house, the group feels a heavy silence. The tall trees surrounding the house seem to create a barrier, making the place even more desolate and gloomy. Large cracks in the walls of the house, the roof tiles were sagging, and the main door had been abandoned for a long time, but the traces of time were still intact. Everything around was old and dirty, as if this house had been forgotten for many years. Charlie stood still, staring at the main door, as if assessing the situation inside. Dr. Reynolds, knowing that they might encounter horrors, decided to enter. "Careful, everyone," he signaled, not taking his eyes off the dog. "We don't know what's inside." The group passed through the old door and stepped inside. The smell of dampness and mold filled the space. Dim light from a few cracks in the wall shone on the rusted furniture. Every step in the house made the air heavier, each footstep echoing like a warning. Charlie led the way, his nose sniffing constantly, his eyes scanning everything. It seemed like he could sense something very clearly. Before long, he stopped at a small room in the back of the house, where the belongings had been left in disarray. Charlie rushed into the room, standing tight in a dark corner, his eyes fixed on an old carpet. "There's definitely something there," Dr. Reynolds said, and the rescue team immediately began to examine the surroundings. A nurse lifted the carpet and discovered a bunker, a large iron door buried under a layer of dust. Everyone's hearts stopped, realizing that this was what they had been looking for. A hidden underground room, possibly containing terrible secrets they had never imagined. "We need to open this door," Lieutenant Miller said, his voice low and his expression serious. "It's not as simple as we thought." The rescue team and the police began to work on the iron door. It was hard work, but patience and determination paid off. When the door finally swung open, a dark and cold underground space opened up before them. Inside, flashlights began to shine, lifting the dust that covered the hidden objects. Old wooden planks, strange rocking chairs, and abandoned wooden crates all seemed to have been left there for a long time. But one thing caught the team's attention. It was fresh, seemingly newly added, as if someone had lived here recently. Charlie continued to lead the team, rushing to a dark corner of the cellar. He stood firm, not barking or moving, just looking at a large wooden crate that was locked. The rescue team and the police approached, a sense of excitement rising in their hearts. When they opened the box, they found a child, about 4 years old, sitting still inside, his eyes looking out in fear. The boy looked very weak, but still alive. Mrs. Smith, when she saw the boy, immediately rushed over, her trembling hands holding the boy in her arms, comforting him as if the child was part of her family. Everyone could not hide their emotions, but they also felt a deep anxiety. Why were there so many children locked up here? This question still had no answer. While the rescue team continued to check the remaining areas of the basement, Dr. Reynolds raised his head, his eyes filled with concern. These disappearances are not coincidences. There is an organization behind all this. He turned back to look at everyone, as if to convey a deep sense of fear. "We have to find these people. We can't let them continue to hurt innocent children." At that moment, Charlie barked again, this time louder than ever, and everyone felt that the truth was worse than they thought. In this basement, the traces they had just found were just the tip of the iceberg. There were still many things that had yet to be revealed, and the monsters they had to face were more terrifying than anything they could have imagined. Every step the group took now carried with it an unyielding determination. This abandoned house was just the starting point of a dangerous criminal hunt, and they knew that, with Charlie leading them, they would never give up until all the mysteries were cleared up. The thrilling chase, finding the culprit as soon as the underground cellar opened, the atmosphere in the abandoned house became even more tense. The children's rescue made everyone feel a little relieved, but the deeper truth still lay somewhere, behind the cold and dark walls of the abandoned house. Everyone knew that this was just the tip of the iceberg, and that everything they had witnessed was not the end. Charlie, despite helping to find the children, still couldn't help but react to the tension in the air. The dog stood up straight, his sharp eyes looking towards the door, towards the forest. A feeling rose in Dr. Reynolds' heart, as if something bad was about to happen. Be careful, he warned the rescue team and the police. Someone is trying to escape. Suddenly, a noise from outside the house startled everyone. The sound of an engine, soft but clear, seemed to stop near the door. It was the sound of a car. For a brief moment, everyone looked at each other, and their eyes were all thinking the same thing. Hadn't the culprit escaped? Before they could call for more help, footsteps rang out, and a figure passed by the front window of the house. It was a man, tall, wearing a gray coat, exactly like the image in the security camera footage. There was no doubt about it. He was the one they were looking for. It's him, Lieutenant Miller shouted, without thinking any further. We have to catch him before he escapes. Charlie shot up without hesitation, immediately rushing out the door, running quickly towards the figure moving quickly away from the house. The dog's footsteps were like a signal to the group. No one could notice the tiredness or fear at this moment. The group chased Charlie, running through the forest, through the dense bushes and under the towering trees. The dark forest only added to their nervousness, but it only made them more determined. The rustling wind mixed with the footsteps, and only the light from the flashlights illuminated the dim path ahead. Charlie led the way, the dog never losing sight. Each step was clear, as if he knew exactly who to pursue. Suddenly, the group realized that they were approaching a steep area, where another abandoned house was hidden behind the dense trees. The dog did not stop but continued to lead the way without hesitation, and then at that moment, they heard the sound of a car rolling. The culprit was trying to get into the car to escape. We can't let him get away, Lieutenant Miller ordered, and the group ran even faster. They were only a very short distance from the enemy. The smell of oil and engine smoke was thick in the air, increasing the tension. Just as the car was about to leave, Charlie, with boundless courage, rushed into the middle of the road, blocking the car. The man in the car, realizing that he could no longer escape, immediately opened the door and jumped out, trying to run into the woods. But what he did not expect was that Charlie, with his speed and determination, quickly blocked it. As the kidnapper got out of the car, Dr. Reynolds and the police team also rushed over in time. Lieutenant Miller waved his hand to signal everyone to stop and surrounded the perpetrator. Stop. You can't escape anymore, he shouted. The man stood there, his eyes filled with panic, but he tried to appear calm. His hand quickly pulled out a dagger. He tried to swing the knife at the police and Dr. Reynolds, but Charlie did not hesitate. The dog rushed over, bit his hand, causing him to drop the knife to the ground. The man let out a miserable scream, but Charlie did not give in, not giving him the chance to run away again. The police quickly subdued the kidnapper, handcuffed him, and dragged him away from the car. He can't get away anymore, Officer Bennett said, his hand shaking as he watched the criminal being arrested. As the police began to search the kidnapper's car, they discovered important documents, careful records of disappearances in the area, and even photos of kidnapped children. This is evidence. This is what we need to close this case, Dr. Reynolds remarked, his eyes sharpening as the truth became clear. The perpetrator was finally taken into custody, but everyone realized that the fight was not over. We have him, but he is only one link in this organization, Lieutenant Miller said, his face tense. There is another, possibly many, behind this. As the police continued to investigate and search through the kidnapper's documents, Charlie stood silently, his eyes still on guard, as if to remind them that the search was not limited to one person. A terrible criminal organization still exists, and the children are not completely saved. Their steps do not stop, because today's victory is only part of a long and dangerous journey ahead. The truth revealed, the leader of the organization after the kidnapper was arrested, everyone thought they had ended the search. However, the closer they got to the case, the more complicated the truth became. The arrested man seemed calm, but his eyes were always full of meaning, as if he knew that this was not over. The rescued children were just part of a larger game, and all he had to do was keep his mouth shut. But the tension in the air could not hide the truth. The shadow of the leader still weighed heavily on everyone. At the police station, Lieutenant Miller and his colleagues were interrogating the kidnapper. He sat silently, his eyes no longer panicked like before, but instead coldly patient, as if he had prepared for a long battle. He refused to answer any questions, his lips moving only a few words, each time the name Gray was mentioned, as if he were trying to hide a huge secret. Gray. Dr. Reynolds repeated, a feeling of excitement rising in his heart. Oh, why is he involved in these kidnappings? The kidnapper just smiled faintly, his eyes glancing back and forth between the police. You don't understand, he said, his voice cold and full of sarcasm. Gray is the one who has it all. He planned it all along, it's just the beginning. You're just playing a small part in this game. Lieutenant Miller clenched his fists, his eyes flashing with determination. He won't get away. We'll find him. Charlie stood still in the interrogation room, eyes shining, as if watching the kidnapper's every move. Dr. Reynolds realized this dog was not only a rescue hero, but also an indispensable part of solving this mystery. Charlie did not hesitate, as if there was an invisible connection between him and the bad guys, an inexplicable feeling. We need to continue to follow him, Lieutenant Miller decided. Let's get more information from the documents we recovered from the car. The photos and notes will lead us to the mastermind. The police team and Dr. Reynolds further examined the documents left by the kidnapper. They were coded and filled with unclear notes, but after careful analysis, they discovered a strange name, Gray, the man behind all the disappearances. This man was no ordinary criminal. He was the organizer, the leader of a transnational criminal network, controlling a group that kidnapped children for unknown purposes. Gray has a past that no one knows about, Dr. Reynolds said, as he and the police team analyzed the notes. These disappearances are not random. He has connections to larger criminal organizations. It all revolves around the trafficking and manipulation of children. The new information opened a new door, expanding the scope of the investigation. In just a few hours, they discovered that Gray was not just a single leader. He ran a terrible criminal organization with links to human trafficking gangs and operated across countries. The children were kidnapped not just to be held captive, but to serve evil purposes they could not imagine. The group was shocked to learn that Gray had been carrying out the kidnappings for more than a decade. An elaborate plan built over years, with traces carefully hidden, making it impossible for the authorities to track him down before. People like Gray always know how to take advantage of silence and darkness to protect their identity. With the information from the documents collected, the police team and Dr. Reynolds had no doubt they were facing an organization that was not only involved in child kidnapping but also had other dark conspiracies. Affecting the kidnapped children are not just victims of a crime, but pieces in a larger power game that Gray and his organization are playing. Dr. Reynolds looked at the newly discovered documents, feeling a surge of anxiety. This organization is more than just a criminal group. This is a powerful, secretive, and dangerous network. If we don't act quickly, more children will be hurt. Charlie, still standing next to Dr. Reynolds, looked up at him with a sharp gaze. The dog seemed to understand that the fight was not over. It had only just begun, and the leader was still at large. We can't let him get away, Dr. Reynolds exclaimed, looking into Charlie's eyes, full of determination. We will find Gray and rescue all the children. Nothing can stop this journey. The group prepared for the next search, knowing that there would be many hardships and challenges ahead, but with Charlie's determination and courage, they would never give up. Gray is still out there somewhere, and a bigger battle awaits them, a battle not just for justice, but for the future of innocent children. Trap and confront Gray as information about Gray and his criminal organization gradually comes to light. The atmosphere in the police team becomes tense. It is no longer just a normal investigation. They are no longer dealing with a single criminal, but an organization with power, resources, and the ability to manipulate everything around them. From the collected documents, a clear plan is gradually outlined to trap Gray and capture him when he has no way to escape. Lieutenant Miller, Dr. Reynolds, and the police team decide to create a fake plan to lure Gray out of hiding. They know that he cannot help but act when he knows that the rescued children will lead to the risk of ruining his entire plan. Their plan is simple. Use a child already rescued as bait, pretending that they have been kidnapped again. These children would be closely guarded, but they would send a message to Gray. We have tapped into his organization, and it is time for him to come out. Dr. Reynolds could not help but worry about the dangers of this plan. He knew that Gray was a dangerous man, willing to do anything to protect his network. But he also knew that if he did not act, more innocent children would continue to be his victims. It was time to confront this terrible criminal organization. Charlie will lead the way for us, Dr. Reynolds said, looking at the dog. He understands what is going on and will help us finish the job. We cannot fail. Charlie stood still, as if sensing the gravity of the situation, his eyes shining brightly at Dr. Reynolds. The dog knew that this was the moment when things came to a head, and that his mission was not just to protect, but to be an important part of this great confrontation. The chase began. In a deserted area of the city, where there were not many people around, the police had prepared everything. The child had pretended to be kidnapped. A fake picture had been set up to lure Gray out. All eyes were on Charlie's every move, knowing that he would lead them to the right place. Suddenly, as if it had been arranged, the lights from a car shone on, and a figure appeared from afar. That person wore a familiar gray coat, walking unhurriedly but very firmly. It was Gray. "Here it is," Lieutenant Miller whispered. "He has appeared." Charlie did not hesitate, immediately rushing forward, leading the police. Everyone followed closely, quietly moving through the deserted streets, where the dim streetlights made the atmosphere even more gloomy. Only a short distance away, they would face the leader directly. As the group approached, Gray realized that something was wrong. He stopped, turned around to look. But it was too late. Charlie had lunged at him, barking loudly and pouncing on him. He quickly pulled out a long knife, raised it high to threaten the dog, but Charlie quickly dodged it and bit his hand, causing the knife to fall. Dr. Reynolds, Lieutenant Miller, and the police immediately surrounded Gray. He had no way out, and now he had to face the consequences of his crimes. He tried to resist, but the police force was too large and too determined. He could not run away anymore. "Tell the truth," Lieutenant Miller roared, his voice full of defiance. "All those children, all you did, you will not get away." Gray looked into their eyes, his face expressionless, and then he smiled slightly, a smile that was full of hidden meaning. "You don't know anything. You've only scratched the surface," he said, his voice cold. His words were a shock. Everyone realized that despite having captured him, Gray had yet to admit everything he was hiding. The group, despite their victory, still felt that the war was not over. They had captured Gray, but the criminal organization he ran was still vast, and the people behind him had yet to be caught. "We can't stop here," Dr. Reynolds said, his eyes filled with determination. "There's still a lot to do. But today, we've won part of the battle." As Gray was being escorted into the police car, Charlie stood next to Dr. Reynolds, his dog's eyes still sharp and alert. Everyone understood that, despite having captured the main culprit, the organization's plot was not over yet. The fight is long, and they will not give up until every culprit is brought to justice. "We've taken on the leader, but this is just the beginning," Lieutenant Miller said. "There's a lot more to do." The group heads toward the car where Gray is handcuffed, but they know the story isn't over yet. A big part of the conspiracy still lies ahead. And with Charlie's courage, they'll continue this journey. The case closed after arresting Gray. The police and Dr. Reynolds thought they had closed the tense case. However, as soon as they brought him back to the police station, the truth gradually revealed itself in a deeper way. Gray still refused to reveal important information about his organization. Even though he was in custody, he remained cold, smiling meaningfully, as if to say that everything was not over. "We caught him," Lieutenant Miller said, his eyes filled with determination. "But he still hasn't revealed everything we need to know." Dr. Reynolds sighed, looking at Gray in the interrogation room. He knew that although he was the main culprit, there were larger layers of secrets that they had yet to uncover. Still, today they had stopped a part of the criminal network that he and his organization ran. As Gray was brought to court, the police and rescue team witnessed a huge change in the emotions of Mrs. Smith and the families whose children had been kidnapped. The children had been rescued, the pain and anxiety in the parents' eyes gradually disappeared, replaced by smiles of joy at being reunited with their children. The children, after days of captivity, were now given the freedom and protection they deserved. Meanwhile, Gray sat in the courtroom, looking at the prosecutor, his eyes still filled with arrogance. "Do you think it's over?" He smiled faintly, his voice devoid of fear. "You don't know anything. What I did was just the tip of the iceberg." Gray's words silenced the entire courtroom. Everyone realized that even if he was convicted, the people behind this organization could still be a big threat. However, the investigation continued, and the police never gave up. They know that justice will be served, even though the journey is long and dangerous. The children have been saved, and they will be cared for and protected. The families will no longer have to live in fear. But the story is not over yet, because there are still many more children who are being deceived and trapped in the vortex of the criminal organization that Gray once commanded. Charlie, the brave dog, stands beside Dr. Reynolds, his eyes still alert as if watching every move around. Throughout the investigation, this dog has become a symbol of loyalty and courage. Charlie not only saves the children's lives, but also leads the team to find the truth, never stopping until justice is served. A week after Gray was sentenced, the police forces continued to expand the investigation, not stopping at one case. They gather more information from the documents Gray left behind and discover that his organization is not limited to one area but has spread internationally. The International Police Department begins to intervene, along with other relevant agencies, with a determination to destroy this criminal network. Although there has been a great step forward in capturing the culprit, a question still echoes in the minds of Dr. Reynolds and the police team. Gray is the leader, but he is only a link in a large system. And this organization still has many secrets that have not been revealed. The children that Charlie saved, the victims who have been freed, can now live a peaceful life, no longer afraid. But the fight against the criminal organization is not over yet. With Charlie's help and the police team's determination to never give up, they will not stop searching until every criminal is brought to light. This story ends here, but the journey to protect innocent children will continue. Brave soldiers, heroes like Charlie, will never give up. And when one story ends, another begins. Mystery not over when Gray's case was finally concluded. The police team and Dr. Reynolds watched from afar, watching the shadow of the police car taking the criminal out of the courthouse. Part of the criminal organization had been arrested, the kidnapped children had been saved, and justice had been served. It seemed that everything was settled, but in the hearts of Dr. Reynolds and the members of the police team, there was still an unsettled anxiety. What they knew about Gray's organization was only the tip of the iceberg. There were many secrets, many people behind him who had not been discovered, and this war was not over. Charlie, despite having fulfilled his duty, showed no signs of resting. The dog stood next to Dr. Reynolds, his eyes shining brightly into the darkness, as if knowing that they had only completed a small part of the long journey ahead. Dr. Reynolds turned to look at the dog, his eyes filled with anxiety. "We did well, Charlie. But the job isn't done. It's not over yet." As the police team continues to investigate and gather more evidence, one thing is clear. The disappearances of children show no signs of stopping. Although Gray has been arrested, the criminal network he heads still has others. One part of the organization's plan has been disrupted, but the investigating agencies know that, as Gray puts it, they have only touched the tip of the iceberg. One rainy evening, as the team is reviewing documents related to the criminal organization, an important announcement from the international police arrives. They discover that Gray is just one link in a vast international network. Other criminal organizations, from gangs in other countries to people behind human trafficking, have not been arrested. Children continue to be kidnapped, not just in this country, but around the world. Dr. Reynolds realizes that although they have rescued the children in this case, their mission cannot end here. The world is facing a much larger crime war, he says, his voice deep. We are just getting started. With new information from Gray's files, the police and Dr. Reynolds know that the organization involves many powerful individuals who can easily hide in the shadows. Everything has been arranged so perfectly, and now they face a bigger question: if they do not find the people behind this organization, will the kidnappings continue? Can they find all of these global criminal networks? Determined to never give up, Dr. Reynolds and the police team continue their investigation. The group prepares for a longer battle, not just against a single criminal, but a global struggle against human trafficking organizations that exploit the vulnerability of children to satisfy their dark plans. "We will not let these children live in fear anymore," Dr. Reynolds says, his eyes shining with determination. "Justice will be served." Charlie stands near him, still with a determined gaze, as if ready to enter a new battle. The dog knows that the journey to protect innocent children continues, and he will always accompany the police team, leading them through the unsolved secrets. The criminals may be on the run, but Charlie and the police team will never give up. In that moment, the group stands there, looking to the future, knowing that this fight will never end. As one part of the story ends, another begins. The evils are still there, and heroes like Charlie and the police officers will never stop fighting. As night falls, the light of the last flashlight continues to shine in the darkness. Bigger secrets, worse dangers await them, but with courage and determination, they will fight to the end for a future where no children have to live in fear.